Hey, greetings, everyone. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, the Executive Director of the American Constitutional Rights Union and the ACRU Action Fund, and want to welcome you to another episode of Live Free TV. And first and foremost, I just want to say to everyone out there, number one, happy Flag Day. Flag Day was established back in 1916 under the Woodrow Wilson administration, and also happy Army birthday, 248 years of service. And it is quite fitting that the Army's motto is "This will defend" when we consider their service to this great nation and the American flag and all of our principles and values. One of the key topics that somehow has just kind of gotten forgotten in the last couple of weeks or so is about our border security. And our border security has so many downstream effects, second and third order negative effects on the human and sex trafficking crisis that we're seeing here in the United States of America, as well as the drug trafficking crisis. Over 100,000 lives have been lost to the fentanyl, which China ships over to the transnational narco criminal terrorists known as the cartels. And then it gets on into our communities. And so we have got to continue to talk about this because this is a serious undermining of our national sovereignty. And for those of us that live in a state like Texas with 1,250 miles of border, it undermines our state sovereignty as well. And I could not think of anyone better to have on to talk to me about this subject of border security than Frank Lopez Jr. Let me give you Frank Lopez Jr.'s background. Frank Lopez Jr. was born in the Rio Grande Valley and is a lifelong native of Texas. After high school, Frank served as a U.S. Army military policeman from 1984 to 1987. He was stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia, deployed to Honduras, and finished his tour of duty in Mainz, West Germany. Frank followed in his father's footsteps, and his father was a Border Patrol agent for 23 years. Frank joined the United States Border Patrol in 1988 and was stationed in Del Rio, Texas, at the age of 22. He served for 30 years, retiring from the United States Border Patrol Agency in 2018, giving him firsthand experience, knowledge, and understanding of border operations and dynamics. He has seen the results of Biden's betrayal of our sovereignty escalate into a true invasion of our country. There came a time in Frank's life when he made the decision to follow Jesus Christ. He then met his future wife, Ada, and they were married in 1991. 2 years later, in 1993, Frank became an ordained minister. Frank and Ada are the parents of twin sons. His law enforcement career and achievements in the United States Border Patrol include, as a chaplain, he was the first uniform agent chaplain in United States Border Patrol history, and he developed a national chaplaincy program. He was a supervisory agent. He oversaw daily patrol operations on the U.S.-Mexico border. He was the assistant chief at the United States Border Patrol headquarters in Washington, D.C. He is a senior firearms instructor, and he holds a number of certifications and has an extensive list of accomplishments post-retirement. Frank Lopez Jr., welcome to ACRU Live Free TV.
Hey, Colonel, thanks for having me on board.
Well, it's my pleasure. And please just call me Alan. You and I have chewed some of the same dirt down there in my visits. And I just want to thank you for all that you're doing. And especially I want to say to you, happy birthday, soldier, 248 years for our United States Army. Thank you for your service.
Happy birthday, Colonel. Thank you.
Yes, sir. And let's talk about your continued service in the United States Border Patrol. When you sit and look at where we are today, talk to us about when you were there serving in uniform in the United States Border Patrol. What were the things that you saw that were working? Because I think that we have to go back and think about, we have seen a time when we were instituting tactics, techniques, and policies and procedures that were effective along the border in contrast to where we are today. So take us through what you have seen that has been successful in safeguarding our sovereignty.
Well, early on, Alan, when I came to Del Rio sector, Del Rio station, you could say it was the traditional fun of being a Border Patrol agent. And when I say that, I mean going out at the beginning of shift, hopping in your car, your vehicle, and then going out on patrol where you hoped to encounter perhaps groups of illegal aliens crossing the river. So we would lay up on the river, conduct line watch operations. When we were fortunate, we'd run around chasing those guys, apprehending them. And then the true climax would then be to interdict some drugs. But admittedly, late 80s, early 90s, times were slower. And what would happen with these illegal aliens and the persons that we apprehended, of course, if they were transporting drugs, they would be prosecuted. But for the illegal aliens, Alan, a lot of times, most of the time, they took a voluntary return to Mexico. A simple VR is what we called it. So they were apprehended, we'd take them to the station, we'd write them up, and then we take them right back to the international port of entry where they walk back across in Mexico. And sure enough, we would probably end up catching those same people multiple times. But at that point, it was a catch, a voluntary return back to Mexico, and then it would reset the clock, But then they started interjecting more of the 8 U.S.C. 1325 prosecutions. That's 8 U.S.C. 1325 is illegal entry. And so we saw where we started processing more people, setting them up is what we would call it, setting them up for prosecution. And even so, it was sporadic. This would have been about the mid 90s. But then there came a point where here in Del Rio, there was an initiative named Operation Streamline that was, that was put forth by then Chief Paul Berg, who worked with our prosecutions unit, worked with the United States Attorney's Office out of the Western District of Texas. And they started putting together a process that was more smoothly maintained. But now we started imposing consequences across a broader selection of the illegal aliens we were capturing. So now there was more of a consequence to the violation of law. And as we started applying that more broadly throughout the Del Rio sector, which consists of Carrizo Springs, Eagle Pass, Uvalde, Del Rio, Comstock, up into San Angelo. And so once the word got out that Del Rio sector had Operation Streamline in place, and if you came through those 200 odd miles of border, you were going to be prosecuted. So that pushed the traffic either upriver, north, or downriver, south of our location. And eventually that was implemented nationwide, Alan. So as the word got out that if you entered illegally, you were going to be prosecuted up to 6 months, that in itself is a deterrent. So pretty much through the late 90s and 2000s, there was some ebb and flow, but as long as there was consequences, people knew that. And then Trump came in and actually more robustly applied that across the border. And then, of course, he enacted some other initiatives like the migrant protection protocols that said if a person was applying for asylum, they would have to wait in Mexico, for their hearing to come up.
The Remain in Mexico policy, which of course was lifted and removed by the Biden administration. So when you look at what was working and what was going well, that sense of having a deterrent out there.
Yes.
When did we see this shift where all of a sudden, I call them narco-criminal terrorist organizations, but when did the cartels become so powerful and really push to control our border like what we see happening now? Because I believe that they're the ones that have the operational control.
Yeah, so you may recall several years ago in Mexico, one of their presidents decided to disrupt the symbiotic relationship that had existed. And what I mean by that is the government, law enforcement, military, et cetera, the government of Mexico, the cartels, the drug trafficking organizations, transnational criminal organizations, and the business community had a symbiotic relationship going on. And part of what goes on in Mexico, Alan, is what is known as la mordida, the bribe. And so la mordida is saying, look, out of every dollar that comes in, you're going to set aside some money for bribery purposes. And there's not the criminal elements. Unfortunately, it meant also the official entities, and this applied to business community. The citizens had to deal with that because now you have a corrupt element within your society, and it touched even, for instance, churches, religious organizations. In order to operate, they also had to give something, of a bribery to be able to operate. And so when the Mexican president declared war on the cartels and disrupted that symbiotic relationship, they enacted the Los Zetas, which was, a military unit. Then they saw that they could make more money on the bad side, wrong side of the law. And honestly, when a large segment of your society is corrupt, where is that line anyways? So the Zetas started waging war on some of the controlling factions, predominantly down towards Matamoros and southern Texas, parallels of Nuevo Laredo and down into those areas. And so that's when you started seeing that very ugly, gruesome bloodshed, with headless corpses hanging from bridges, and people getting cooked up in what they call a guisado, which is Spanish for a stew, getting cooked up in 55-gallon drums full of chemicals and getting dissolved, all kinds of stuff. And even before then, these criminal organizations also, let's not forget, were operating along a darker trajectory here, Alan, with the Santa Muerte and with the Satanism, occult worship. You may recall down in Brownsville, in the 90s, it would have been about the early 90s, that some college goers, spring breakers down in South Texas, Matamoros, across from Brownsville, were abducted, and eventually it came to light that they had been murdered, but also had been part of an occult ceremony. They had been offered up as protection from law enforcement entities. So it's different dynamics at work, but predominantly this cartels gain more power when that symbiotic relationship, that stasis per se, that normalized mode of operations, that's as corrupt as it is to us looking from the outside in, that was the norm. And so that's when you had this extreme bloodshed, warfare, grenade launchers, 50 caliber machine guns in the streets of border cities right across from American cities.
I've always said that we're really not fighting against a business organization or a gang. We're fighting an insurgency against a well-armed, entity, a force. And that's really what you're talking about. And now they're incredibly well financed. Talk to us about how much money the cartels are making on this human trafficking and sex trafficking, and how many different nations. This is not just about Mexicans coming across the border. This is not even just about Central Americans. How many, different nations have you encountered or of people coming across this border illegally now?
So, the estimates are out there, from millions, tens of millions per week. The one thing we can be certain of, Alan, is that, and how can you take into account something like that, where, with any, sense of trying to get even somewhat of, estimates per se, because there is no government duty imposed on that. There's no government, overwatch systems in place. It's a lot of free wheeling and dealing out there, but a majority of these people have had to go through the clutches of the cartels. And so that is part of the dynamic that's at work out there. The other thing about it, and it's something that cannot be lost, is the cost that it's having on human life out here. These are people, I've said it, regardless of nationality, or status. These are people and human beings. And so when all this balance was disrupted, I really believe that it also stepped outside God's plan and order. And so that's why we have so much mayhem and murder and death taking place out here.
Now, Joe Biden comes into office, and things have pretty much been stabilized down there along the border. What were some of the initial things that you saw coming out of this Biden administration and that just completely changed. I mean, we know about these notices to reappear, which the people call permisos, gives them permission to come into the country. But what are some of the specific policies that you see implemented by the Biden administration that has contributed to this incredible, humanitarian crisis and disaster and undermining of our sovereignty?
So one of the first things that Biden did, and I remember reading about this and being alarmed, was that he had reached out to the United Nations for help in orchestrating and mitigating and coordinating this expected mass movement of people. Biden campaigned, and several times he said, "You will be welcome." And he said this in the campaign trail, "You will be welcome to America. Everybody that comes in will be allowed to come in." And sure enough, as soon as he became president, he reached out to the United Nations and started kicking in not just the UN, but all their collaborating partners, the non-government organizations, the George Soros, et cetera. But what we saw then was an uptick in the number of children that started coming in. So one of the first things we did, aside from removing the Remain in Mexico policy, well, two things that I can think of right off the bat from talking with sheriffs throughout the district was that the U.S. attorneys were not prosecuting as many people. Remember, before here in Del Rio sector, Operation Streamline was a very strong, efficient, cohesive effort with the U.S. Attorney's Office to prosecute people coming through Del Rio sector. Eventually went nationwide with corresponding jurisdictions, but they scaled back the number of prosecutions. I remember hearing that from several sheriffs. The other thing that happened was that all of a sudden these massive contracts went out. Endeavors was one of those major corporations and others that started getting money from Health and Human Services and DHS itself to set up, camps, temporary, shelters for unaccompanied alien children. And so as soon as we saw that, we started having a number of rallies in our area that spread throughout the region in Texas, because we knew that that was going to be an enticement, Alan, for more children to be inserted into the pipeline, whether it was kidnapped children, parents that believed that they were actually sending their children to a better future in America, or children that were actually being sold by the parents to cartels to be used. But we knew there would be an increase. So those were some very stark differences. They started changing the policy. The other thing that happened was the propaganda machine that kicked into place. I was at Del Rio when Raul Ortiz became the chief of the Border Patrol. He's fixing to retire at the end of this month, actually. His replacement's already been named. But he said and did some things that honestly, as a 30-year Border Patrol agent, really disappointed me. It caused a lot of disgust, dismay, and eventually anger, not just by myself, but by many other retired agents and current agents. He started going out on this speaking tour, per se, saying that what Trump had done were the policies of the past. We had new policies that would be effective, that would address the border situation. And so we're looking at him because it's as if he was saying, yeah, the fire's under control, but yet you see the firemen throwing gas on the fire. And so we're like, hey, man, you cannot lie to us. And so what happened with all that was that the propaganda machine got into full speed. And one of the things he said at Del Rio when he was here was that he turned to Sheriff Cole was there, and actually a couple other sheriffs and some other law enforcement. And he said, we're working with our partners. It's a whole of government approach to this issue. The more our law enforcement officers help us, the faster our Border Patrol agents can get out to the field. And I just knew that was just a direct, preposterous lie, Alan, because the more boots on the ground you had, the more law enforcement to catch people, the more people that had to be processed to eventually be released. And so that's when this really became very stark, very evident that this was now a whole of government approach to the biggest smuggling operation in United States history, because so many of the things that I saw taking place on the border, and I worked anti-smuggling unit operations, so many of the things that I saw working were the same dynamics, the same elements. We labeled aspects of these operations. We had names for them. This was now being done by the United States government, by our DHS personnel and by contractors. And it's been sickening to watch. And that's why I have been also very critical of Governor Abbott, because it was very clear, Alan, that Biden was betraying us. And so at that, we fall back. What is our second line of defense? Or
Yes.
what should, and in this case, I believe that, Texas should have been first to step up. We have the largest segment of border, and we have an obligation to the rest of the country, to hold fast, defend our sovereignty, defend our security, protect our communities. And so now what we're seeing is these elements of the invasion spreading into the country, and now it's causing economic hardship, not just those communities and those governments, but on the people of the interior of the United States.
Well, it's interesting because that's a great transition point. We know that the federal government, the Biden administration, has pretty much so failed the people that live down there along the border. And you're down there every day, and I've been down there, and we've seen the struggles for many of those constitutional sheriffs, like Sheriff Bradco in Kenny County, and of course, they're in Del Rio, over in Eagle Pass, all along the border. So when you look at what Texas could or should be doing, we hear a lot of talk, and just recently, Governor Abbott came out and started talking about putting inflatable buoys out there in the Rio Grande River. I mean, are we being effective? I mean, are we also being lied to at the state government level about securing the border?
I would say yes. I would say that Governor Abbott has put on a huge smoke and mirror initiative here. What he's doing, look, there's 1,250 miles of Texas border with Mexico, and his initiatives are in small pieces of that border. What he has done is, for instance, down in Eagle Pass, he has showcased, putting out the box cars, putting out the concertina wire. They pushed him back. Yes, an RGV in a small segment. They were talking about repelling here in Eagle Pass, and now they set out this floating, a ball, barrier in the river, but it's just portions. I can go, 50 feet, 50 yards upriver or downriver of those enforcement infrastructure per se, and there's crossing points all up and down the border, Alan. So it is a huge show, and I have witnessed and I have videotaped, as evidence for people, how people come across and they are then they walk up to National Guard or National Guard walks over to them, whatever, but they are then taken into custody by National Guard. And in the past, DPS did this a lot as well. And they were held until DHS, whether it was a actual government employee, Border Patrol agent, or a contracted entity, would drive up and then take custody of those people, and National Guard and DPS went right back to what they were doing, which was basically killing time, waiting for the next group of people to come across, and they would then contact DHS to come and pick him up. What we saw down in the Rio Grande.
Well, you bring up a great point. I want to interject it real quick, because what you just described is what we are being told is an apprehension of an illegal immigrant or illegal alien. But what the end result is not that they get, repatriated back across the river or they get returned. In other words, what you're saying is that they get held in spot, then they get turned over to the federal agency, DHS, and then what? They're just pushed on.
Yeah, so that's been the predominant aspect of it per se, the predominant numbers. Now there are some people that are prosecuted. You might get some some folks that have been previously deported, some prior deports. And then, of course, Abbott kicked in Operation Lone Star, which in and of itself, I mean, it's been a mixed bag. So some folks appreciate it. You can go out to Terrell County out in Sanderson, Texas. They appreciate the heightened DPS presence out there and the brush tracking units and such. But it has also caused a burden on the prosecutorial
Yes.
processes and systems. And so look, for me, it's quite simple. And you said it before. I've been in person, and I've seen your footage of you saying this. What Abbott should have done was force the constitutional dilemma. I know you called it a constitutional crisis, but in such a time as this, what Abbott should have done, when a person crosses and is observed by a state agent, per se, a National Guard troop, law enforcement, if they are seen crossing that river, they should then be immediately, initially maybe some biographical input, information, and then taken right back to the river. And the immediate response from people is, well, that's a federal response. That's a federal responsibility. And this is what I always say to that, Alan. When the house is on fire, if the fire department with the fancy multi-million-dollar, engine, the massive machines are not doing their job, then you are happy to get the volunteer fire department or happy to get the bucket brigade in there. You put out the fire. And so Abbott has done a bunch of throwing things up on the wall to see what sticks, see what gets positive results. But what he needs to be doing is taking these people and taking them to the river, and eventually back to the ports of entry. I'm not saying at the river itself, but take them to the ports of entry and telling them you will not enter Texas illegally. And do that across the border, and then the word will get out. Hey, no pases por Texas. Don't come across through Texas. They will catch you and they will return you to Mexico. They will make you go to the port of entry, and then you push it over to New Mexico and let New Mexico deal with that. And then what happens is that as that happens, Alan, yes, that will cause a increased workload on the ports of entry, but at least it's more controlled. It's not this wide open chaos with all these failure to yields all over the place and these gotaways that we don't even know who's coming to the country. And you had asked me earlier about the different countries. I was seeing everything. I remember when they were coming across Latin America, the Caribbean, African nations, and then we started seeing the European and Middle East folks coming across. And in the past, that was alarm bells. Those were communications went all up and down the chain to Washington, D.C., to the commissioner's room and above. And so now if you look, just this morning, I was reading about the number of special interest aliens from the Middle Eastern countries that are coming across. And it is tremendous. So if Abbott were to just defend Texas, okay, so it's a constitutional crisis. Look, they just threatened to impeach the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton. They're impeaching him. Who knows what's going to happen with that? Look at what they're doing with President Trump. Our nation is in crisis. And so we need bold, upfront leadership. And now the pain is being felt throughout the country. The solution is not to use more of our money, Alan, and that's the other thing. This is costing us tremendous amounts, hundreds of billions of dollars, and that's all government can do is hire more people, throw more money, more contracts, more expenditures. And I told a command sergeant major DPS trooper down here in Eagle Pass, I told him all Governor Abbott has to do is activate the veterans, tell them come and stand and repel. And once they see Americans standing there, they will be repelled. And that's already taking place. There's pockets of places out here, Alan, where American citizens are using nonviolent means to turn people back, telling them don't cross in these 100, 200, a mile and a half. Do not cross here. If we catch you, we're not going to turn you over to Border Patrol. We're going to make you go across the river. Now, that might raise some eyebrows and stir the angst of, I don't know, Southern Poverty Lawson and all those other folks. But these are exigent circumstances.
Yeah. Well, you have left people with no other course of action when they
Yes.
don't see any assistance coming from, like I say, the federal government, the state level, when they consistently see what should be troubling to all of us, the amount of single military-age males
Yes.
that are coming across this border. And again, many foreign nationals, they have to be concerned. And so this brings me to the next question I want to discuss with you is, what is the morale of the Border Patrol down there right now? Because they see what is being said on the news. They are there every single day to know what's happening. How is the morale of the Border Patrol down there in your area in the Del Rio sector?
So the quick pat answer, it seems like folks like to say, oh, morale's low. It's more complicated than that. Look,
Okay.
So let me tell you what I see here in Del Rio, for instance. A year, 2 years ago, it was through the floor. It was folks were devastated. They hated life. But then what happened was, as money got thrown at the situation, this infrastructure got put in place, hundreds of millions of dollars to build soft-sided processing facilities. So now you can centralize your processing, and you can make it assembly-like. And they started hiring processing, Border Patrol processing coordinators is what they're called. So think about it this way, Alan. So now you can get 10 people that do the initial input of all the data into the system. And so that's 10 files. Let's just say 10 files get done in 30 minutes. Boom. They all funnel into one agent who then reviews and with the authority that he has as an immigration officer, which those processing coordinators don't have, to administer oaths, to enforce immigration law, etc. He then signs off on 10 files, which he only did half of a percentage of the work on it, review and sign. And so now what that does is it frees up more agents to be out in the field. Yeah. So the morale has increased a little bit. And recently there was a shot in the arm with the announcement of Raul retiring. Look, this guy, unfortunately, I worked with a man, I know him. He really damaged his legacy, I would say, just to put it mildly. And so there was a shot in the arm. Oh, now we have Mr. Jesse Owens out of Del Rio sector, who's going to be the new chief. Maybe things will be different. And so here comes Frank, the wet blanket. Things are not going to change per se, because chiefs at the sector level and even at the national level, Alan, you know this, they do not formulate and implement policy. That's correct. They may be a part of it. They may be asked for input. They may, thumbs up or thumbs down aspects of it. But it is the commissioner, not even the commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, which is the parent organization to Border Patrol. It is up to Alejandro Mayorkas and Biden's controllers. And so, unfortunately, Mr. Owens, what he has to do now is go out there and try to sell bags of doo-doo to these agents, try to wrap him up nice. My advice to him would be, whatever you do, do not go out on a my boss is the greatest boss speaking tour like Raul Ortiz did. He went out and tried to say that Alejandro Mayorkas was really doing his job and the greatest DHS secretary ever. And that is what sickened people to the core. And so
there was a video. Wasn't there a video of some of the agents pushing back against him? When he was saying those things? Yeah, I remember that video.
Yeah, there was. And so that's what I would say to him. Just don't go out and do that. The other aspect that deals with the morale. So I got word from an agent who said, hey, Frank, something weird is going on here. Okay, what's going on? This was last year, early last year, maybe even at the tail end of the year before. But anyways, this agent said, we're getting people that have already been processed
I
But
was
they're
going to
not.
get to that. Yeah, I was going to
Yes.
get to that because now the Biden administration. So when they say that the numbers of illegal aliens coming across the border is dropping, what they're actually doing, and this again is unconstitutional. He's come up with this app by way people
Yes.
can apply to be paroled and they can get processed south of the border. So
Yeah.
we are processing people to come across our border and undermining our agents. Am I right?
Yes, it is. So look, we've always had that, and it started happening around 2000 with the Patriot Act, and it's certainly with the
Mhm.
9/11. The forward, we'd always had agents at the embassies. We had some forward deployed agents out there, but post 9/11, that became a bit more robust. We had foreign operations branch, which was daily communication with Mexican GOM, government of Mexico counterparts, the
Mhm.
rescue and law enforcement entities. But now they are forward deploying. And I remember actually one of your first guests, I think, if not the first, Michael Yans, said
Yes.
that he had been down in Panama and that he actually saw Alejandro Mayorkas fly in.
Yes, he did.
And I know that was on your show. And so that then what that did is it ratified. I forget what the word is, but anyway,
Verified.
it
Verified.
verified what this agent had said. They are being forward processed, and this agent asked the guy, "Well, where did they get this fingerprints, and where did they get your
Hmm.
picture?" And he said they did it down in Panama, and so that's what they have been doing, and so that's how they can manipulate the numbers. And this morning I was reading, oh, the numbers are down since Title 42 went away, and people are trying to figure out, well, the other thing that just came out of the Washington Insider is that they're being flown into the country as well, Alan.
Hmm.
And so now these people they're being flown in deep. They're landing in Chicago and in the
Hmm.
interior, because we also have Customs and Border Protection Office of Field Operation personnel at airports and seaports. And so what we have been seeing was the land ports, on the borders of Mexico, Canadian and Mexico, Canada and Mexico, but now they're flying in to the interior. So it is the airport Office of Field Operations personnel that are having to deal with them. And so that's why Border Patrol can say our apprehensions are going down. Well, yeah, CBP / Office of Border Patrol apprehensions encounters are going down,
Yeah.
because CBP / Office of Field Operation encounters are going up at internal airports.
Yeah.
So it's a numbers game. It's manipulation. They're not going to slow down. As a matter of fact, they're going to be more emboldened. They're throwing more money. Every single bill, it seems like, a few exceptions, bipartisan per se. It's all about throwing more money at this problem. And I just saw the latest one. I think it's 500 pages with Veronica Escobar out of El Paso.
Yes.
And I think it's Salazar out of Florida. And so interwoven in those 500 pages is, of course, amnesty. Amnesty
Hmm.
for all these people. And the word is that Biden will also work towards with friendly legislators towards granting these people citizenship. And what a slap in the face for the
Hmm.
immigrants, those that are trying to do this legally, trying to do it the right way, paying the money, waiting, being faithful, studying for their civics exam and everything, for the naturalization exam. It's a tremendous slap, and it's a huge burden, Alan, on our infrastructure. And I don't mean, the physical roads and bridges, et cetera. I'm talking about our social services,
Yeah. Yeah.
our social security, because these people qualify for that. Texas has an office that is set up specifically to deal with those people that are released from Office of Refugee Resettlement. Texas has a mirror organization, and they qualify for Texas benefits. And so we are just bleeding money out of every pore in our bodies, Alan, at a time when inflation's sky high, property taxes just hit, and people
Yeah.
are losing their heads about that here in Texas. And so it's terrible. And so it really, We mentioned this in our pre-show conversation here. Your article on Broken Arrow, Alan, it really is causing people to say, they're breaking us. They don't want us to own homes. Government has already shown itself to be oppressive. They have weaponized the entities of the government against us. They have, in essence, a standing army with all these paramilitary law enforcement agencies. Yeah. And we have seen this propensity, Alan, and I say this as a 33-year law enforcement officer, 3 years military police, 30 federal, and many relatives and friends that are law enforcement. But there is a propensity within law enforcement to follow orders without thinking of the consequences, without applying constitutional tests to their actions, Alan. And that is a scary prospect for we the people. And so there is a sense of dreadful contemplation. And I think this is probably the process that folks had to work through leading up to the Revolutionary War, leading up to the Civil War, leading up to a Texas War for Independence. And anytime there has been a conflict, there is this contemplation and a weighing of the costs of what seems to be what is going to be the logical, right, God-ordained actions of men who want to be free and who are born free by God. And that's a terrible thing to contemplate, but where we have to think and talk about that.
No, you're absolutely right. And I will tell you that you have been doing incredible things down there. I remember the video that you took exposing the charter flights that were taking off from the Shepherd Air Base there.
Laughlin.
That's right. Laughlin Air Base there in Del Rio, because there is something going wrong. And when people don't want to follow the Constitution, when they're willfully and intentionally putting the lives of Americans in danger and putting the rights and freedoms of Americans second, third, maybe fourth, we do have to start thinking about how do we rectify the situation. Yeah. And that's what we try to do here with the American Constitutional Rights Union, is talk about the constitutional solutions. So Frank Lopez Jr., before I let you go, where can people follow you? Where can people see all the great reports and videos that you're doing pretty much so daily from down there at the border?
A few places. So first of all, they can go to Facebook and YouTube, look for Frank Lopez Jr., U.S. Border Patriot. Frank Lopez Jr., U.S. Border Patriot. On Twitter, I'm just there as U.S. Border Patriot. And on the web, you can find me at usborderpatriot.com.
Well, I want to thank you for your incredible amount of service to this country, and in green of the United States Army and in green of the United States Border Patrol. That's what this country is all about. And, speaking to you, this is not about black, white, Hispanic, Asian. It's about doing what is right. It's about honoring God, country, and the great state of Texas. So Frank Lopez Jr., thank you for taking time to be with us on Live Free TV.
Thank you, Colonel.
God bless.
God bless you.